Get her out of my command center. General Caldwell said it without looking up. 12 generals left. One of them actually pushed back his chair, like the meeting could simply continue now that the interruption had been handled. Claire Whitmore did not move. She placed her hand flat on the classified fold there and looked directly at the man who had just tried to erase her from the room. In 17 minutes, she said, 3 of your soldiers will stop responding. Nobody laughed after that. Nobody moved, because somewhere in the Arizona desert, the clock was already running, and she was the only person in that room who knew it. Before we go any further, subscribe to this channel right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The folder landed on the table with a quiet, flat sound, not a dramatic slam, not a theatrical gesture designed to get attention. Just a classified folder dropped gently onto the surface of a table, surrounded by 12 of the most powerful military officers in the United States Army. And the woman who placed it there didn't say a single word, not yet. Major Claire Whitmore stood at the edge of the table and let the silence do the work for her. She was 36 years old. She wore no combat decorations on her uniform, no long row of medals, no ribbons that told a story of battles won. Her file, if you looked it up in the system, had been sealed for 4 years, classified, inaccessible to most people in that building. She carried one folder, one weathered field map covered in handwritten notes so dense and detailed that it looked almost like a work of art. And she had been awake for 31 hours. The room she had just walked into was not a normal conference room. It was located 70 feet underground in one of the most secure military facilities in the continental United States. The walls were reinforced. The air was recycled and temperature controlled. The digital screens running along 3 of the 4 walls displayed real-time satellite imagery, drone feeds, terrain analysis, and troop positioning data that had taken 11 months to compile. And at the center of it all was a massive digital map showing Operation Iron Horizon in its entirety. 8,000 American personnel, armored convoys, aerial support, intelligence teams, drone surveillance units, all of it coordinated down to the minute. All of it planned, reviewed, revised, and reviewed again by some of the most experienced military minds the country had produced in the last generation. And now Claire Whitmore was standing in front of all of it. She had not been invited. That was the first thing General Richard Caldwell had said when she walked through the door. Major Whitmore. He had said her name the way a man says the name of someone who has arrived at the wrong party. This is a strategic planning session, not an intelligence briefing. You weren't on the access list for this room. Claire had looked at him steadily. No, sir, I wasn't. Then I'd like to understand, Caldwell said, leaning back in his chair, with the kind of ease that comes from 3 decades of being the most important person in any room he enters. Why exactly you're standing in my command center at 2 in the morning? Because in 18 minutes, Claire said, your Western observation team is going to go dark. The room did not go quiet immediately. There was a half-second delay, the kind of pause that happens when the human brain receives information it doesn't know how to categorize. And then one by one, the conversations that had been happening across the table simply stopped. 12 generals, all of them looking at her. General Michael Hayes, 2 stars Southwest Command, leaned forward slightly. He was a large man with a broad face and 28 years of field experience. He was not the kind of man who intimidated easily, but he was also not the kind of man who hid his skepticism. Come again, he said. Claire didn't repeat herself. She placed her hand on the folder, opened it, and spread the field map across the table between the digital screens. Observation Post Eagle, she said. Western perimeter, 3 personnel. They will fail to check in at Abura 500. Nobody moved. Then General Caldwell laughed. It came out loud and clean and completely without restraint. The kind of laugh that wasn't really about finding something funny. It was about making a point, about establishing in front of everyone in the room exactly how seriously this warning was going to be taken. You're telling me, he said, spreading his hands open like a man presenting something obvious to a slow student, that one junior analyst is going to walk into this room and tell 12 generals who have spent a combined 400 years in the United States Army that we have made an error. He looked around the table. General Hayes shook his head slowly. General Torres, who had been reviewing a convoy timeline, set down his stylus and folded his arms. Several others exchanged glances that said everything their words didn't need to. Sir, Claire said, I'm not telling you that you made an error in the operation plan. I'm telling you that you have a vulnerability that wasn't visible from the standard surveillance approach. We have satellite coverage of the entire corridor, Caldwell said. Yes, sir, you have satellite coverage of the roads. A pause. I was looking at the mountain. General Hayes made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a dismissal. It was something in between. The mountain was cleared in the preliminary sweep, twice. It was cleared for personnel and vehicles, Claire said. Nobody was looking for preparation signatures. Preparation signatures, Caldwell repeated, and the way he said it slowly, carefully, like he was tasting something unpleasant, made two of the junior officers near the back of the room look down at their notes. Soil displacement, Claire said. She moved her finger across the map to a ridge labeled Falcon Ridge. The vehicle tracks near the base of this ridge, the communication frequencies that have been cycling on a non-standard band for the last 72 hours. We monitor all frequencies in the operational corridor, said General Torres. You monitor the frequencies in your communication protocol, Claire said. This one is outside that range. Torres narrowed his eyes. You're saying there's a signal we missed. I'm saying there's a signal that wasn't in anyone's task list to look for. Because nobody was looking at Falcon Ridge as a threat position, it was marked as cleared terrain. She looked at the map, then she looked back up at the room. Whoever is out there didn't come in from the road. They came down from the mountain 3 days ago. The silence was a different kind of silence now. Not the contemptuous quiet of before. Not the polite stillness of people waiting for a junior officer to finish her speech so the real conversation could resume. It was the silence of something shifting very slightly in the back of people's minds. The silence of doubt that hasn't yet become belief, but has stopped being entirely comfortable with certainty. But General Caldwell was not a man who lived comfortably in doubt. Major Whitmore, he said, and his voice had dropped from amusement into something more clipped and deliberate. I have been running operations since before you were in high school. I have reviewed this operation personally. I have had it reviewed by our satellite team, our drone intelligence unit, and our forward scouts. We have not missed anything on Falcon Ridge. Claire looked at him, not defiant, not emotional, not desperate, just steady. The way someone looks when they are not trying to win an argument because they already know what is true. Sir, she said quietly, with respect in about 16 minutes we'll know. In the far corner of the room near the communications station, Captain Evan Miller was doing something that none of the generals were doing. He was listening to her. Miller was 29 years old. He had been in the Army for 7 years. He was not a general. He was not a commander. He was a communications officer assigned to the operations team, which meant that most of the people in this room looked at him the way they looked at the furniture present, and necessary but not particularly interesting. He had been watching Claire from the moment she walked in. Not because he found her interesting in some personal way, but because he had learned over 7 years of watching powerful people operate, that the most important signals in any room were almost never coming from the loudest voice. And Claire Whitmore was saying something very specific. A frequency, outside the standard range, active near Falcon Ridge for 72 hours. Miller quietly picked up his headset. He didn't ask permission. He didn't announce what he was doing. He simply turned to his communication board, pulled up the monitoring software, and began searching outside the standard operational band, while the generals continued debating. The timeline for this operation cannot be disrupted based on an unverified claim from a single source, General Hayes was saying. We have protocols for a reason. Absolutely, said General Caldwell. And the protocol does not involve halting an 8,000 personnel operation because one analyst walked in with a handwritten map. I understand the protocols, Claire said. I'm not asking you to halt the operation. Caldwell looked at her. What are you asking? I'm asking you to delay the convoy movement scheduled for 0500 by 45 minutes. 45 minutes. Yes, sir. Long enough to get a verification drone over Falcon Ridge with a thermal sweep. We already ran thermal imaging on that ridge. You ran it 48 hours ago, sir, before they moved into position. The table went quiet again, and General Torres leaned forward. He was not a man who had survived 26 years in military intelligence by ignoring things completely. What exactly are you expecting a thermal sweep to show, Major? Heat signatures, Claire said. At least 8 personnel, possibly 12. concealed beneath the ridge overhang on the eastern face. You're telling me we have a dozen people hidden on a ridge that our surveillance team has cleared. I'm telling you that the signature pattern matches every preparation methodology I've documented in 14 weeks of watching this corridor. 14 weeks, Caldwell said flatly. 14 weeks, Claire confirmed, mostly alone, working off the satellite archive and field reports. By yourself? Yes, sir. Something shifted in the room again. This time it wasn't doubt. It was something closer to frustration, the specific frustration that experienced people feel when they encounter something they can't immediately dismiss, but also don't want to believe. Because if Claire was right, it meant something uncomfortable. It meant that one person working alone looking at the same data everyone else had access to had found something that a team of hundreds had missed. And that was not a comfortable thing to sit with in a room full of people who had built their careers on being the ones who didn't miss things. Captain Miller had been quiet for 4 minutes. Then he pulled off his headset. He set it down on the table very carefully. And he said, in a voice that was completely flat and completely controlled, "There's a signal." Nobody heard him at first. "There's a signal," he said again louder. General Caldwell stopped mid-sentence. He turned to look at Miller, clearly irritated at being interrupted. "Captain, this is not the appropriate frequency 847.3 megahertz, Miller said. Non-standard band, burst transmission pattern. It's been cycling every 19 minutes for the last 3 days. The room stopped. Miller looked across the table at Claire. She looked back at Baum. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Miller looked back at General Caldwell. "Sir, it's exactly where she said it would be. Falcon Ridge, eastern face." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. 12 generals in a room and not one of them spoke for 7 full seconds. Then General Hayes said very quietly, "What time is it?" Someone checked the clock. 0452, a voice said. 8 minutes. 8 minutes until 0500. 8 minutes until observation post Eagle was scheduled for its next communication check. General Caldwell stood up from his chair. He looked at Claire. He looked at the map. He looked at the satellite feed on the screen. And Claire could see it happening the moment that process of recalculation occurs in a person who has spent decades trusting their own judgment. The gears of it moving slowly, reluctantly, like a machine being asked to run in reverse. "Major Whitmore," he said, "if we were to delay the convoy—" "You have 7 minutes to make that call, sir," Claire said. "If the convoy moves at 0500 and there are personnel on that ridge with the kind of preparation signature I've identified, the lead vehicles will be in position within line of fire of the eastern overhang before you can pull them back." "What are you basing the line of fire calculation on?" "The angle of the ridge," Claire said, "the slope gradient, the distance from the overhang to the convoy route." She put her finger on the map. 300 meters. At that distance with elevation advantage, they don't need anything sophisticated. "Captain Miller," General Torres said without looking away from the map, "get me the drone controller for Sector 7. "Yes, sir," Miller said, and he was already reaching for the communication panel. "If we redirect the drone now," General Hayes said, thinking out loud, "we can have thermal imagery in 12 minutes, which is 4 minutes after the convoy starts moving," Claire said. Hayes looked up at her. "If there are personnel on that ridge," she said, 4 minutes is enough time to lose the lead vehicles." The room was doing what rooms of powerful people do when they encounter a crisis they weren't prepared for. People were talking over each other. Someone was pulling up a secondary map. Someone else was reaching for a phone. Caldwell was standing with both hands on the table staring at the convoy route on the digital display. He looked like a man who was doing a very specific kind of math, the math of risk, the math of probability, the math of what it costs to be wrong in one direction versus what it costs to be wrong in the other direction. Claire waited. She had done her math 14 weeks ago. "Major Whitmore," Caldwell said, "Sir, if I delay this convoy and your signal turns out to be atmospheric interference or a malfunctioning piece of equipment, then you have lost 45 minutes on a timeline," Claire said, "and you can document that I advised it, and you can note in the record that my analysis was incorrect." A pause. "And if you don't delay it—" Caldwell looked at her for a long time. "Then we find out in about 6 minutes, she said. Captain Miller had the drone controller on the line. He was already talking in a low, rapid voice. 2 other officers were pulling up the thermal imaging protocol. The room had shifted physically toward the screens on the wall. General Torres turned to Caldwell. Richard, your call. Caldwell was quiet for 3 seconds. Hold the convoy. The order moved through the room like electricity. Hold the convoy. Miller was already repeating into his headset. All units convoy movement delayed. Holding at staging position. Confirm. For a moment, everything was suspended. The digital clock on the wall read 0454, 6 minutes until 0500, 6 minutes until observation post Eagle was scheduled to check in. Claire looked at her map. She looked at the clock. She looked at the satellite feed on the wall screen showing the convoy vehicles sitting motionless in the Arizona desert. And she stood very still because she already knew. She had known for 14 weeks. What she hadn't known, what nobody ever knows until the moment arrives, is whether knowing the truth is enough. Whether the people who hold the power will listen in time. Whether the warning arrives before the disaster or after it. General Hayes was watching her from across the table. He was a man who had spent 28 years reading people, and right now he was reading Claire Whitmore. The way you read a document, you're trying to understand. You don't look relieved, he said. She looked at him. Why not, he said. We held the convoy. We're running the thermal sweep. If you're right, we've avoided a serious problem. Claire was quiet for a moment. Because observation post Eagle is already out there, she said. Hayes went still. 3 personnel, she said. They've been in position since 2200 hours. They're experienced soldiers, Hayes said, but his voice had changed slightly. Yes, sir. Claire looked at the clock. But they're in the wrong place. And whoever is on that ridge has had 3 days to prepare. 4:55. 5 minutes. The thermal drone was in the air. Miller was tracking his position on the secondary screen. General Torres had the drone footage feed patched into the main display. The eastern face of Falcon Ridge was dark on the screen. Dark and still and completely unremarkable for about 40 seconds. And then the thermal imaging software processed the data. And on the screen, 11 heat signatures appeared on the eastern face of Falcon Ridge. 11, not 8, not 12, 11. Exactly positioned at the elevation and coordinates Claire had identified on her handwritten map. The room did not erupt. It went very, very quiet. Captain Miller stared at the screen. Then he looked at Claire. Then he looked back at the screen, as if he was checking to make sure both things were real. General Torres said one word. How? It wasn't quite a question. General Hayes had both hands flat on the table staring at the thermal display. 11 bright heat signatures on a ridge that had been officially cleared. 11 people who had been there for days waiting in exactly the position that one analyst with a handwritten map had said they would be. General Caldwell hadn't said anything. He was looking at Claire, and the expression on his face was one that very few people who knew Richard Caldwell had ever seen. It was the expression of a man recalculating, not just the operation, himself. Major Whitmore, he said, and his voice was different now. Something had come out of it. The ease, the confidence, the comfortable authority of a man who had never seriously doubted his own judgment in a professional setting. Sir, Claire said, the convoy is held. We have confirmed presence on Falcon Ridge. He paused. What's the next threat window? And just like that, not ceremonially, not with any announcement, not with the kind of dramatic acknowledgement that might have felt satisfying 12 generals who had spent a combined 400 years in the United States Army turned to face a 36-year-old major with a sealed file and a handwritten map. And they listened. But even as the room reorganized itself around the intelligence she had been carrying alone for 14 weeks, the clock on the wall kept moving. 4:68, 2 minutes until 0500. And somewhere out in the darkness of the Arizona desert, 3 soldiers at observation post Eagle had no idea what was sitting on the ridge above them. No idea what had been sitting there for 3 days. No idea that the warning had been given. No idea whether it had been given in time. Miller was on the radio now, trying to reach the observation post. His voice calm and controlled the way communications officers are trained to be calm and controlled. Observation post Eagle, this is operations. Please respond. Static. Observation post Eagle, this is operations. Do you copy? Static. Claire was looking at the clock, not because she didn't know what time it was, because she was counting. The convoy had been held. The thermal signatures had been confirmed. The ridge had been identified. All of that was true. But there were 3 soldiers in the desert who had been in position since 2200 hours. 3 soldiers who had checked in at midnight at 0200 at 0400. 3 soldiers who were scheduled to check in again at exactly 0500. Miller tried again. Observation post Eagle operations. Do you copy? The clock hit 0500. And the radio stayed silent, not static, not interference. Silence. The specific, absolute silence of a channel that has no one on the other end. Miller looked up from his console. I didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Every person in the room had heard the same thing, or rather had heard the same nothing. General Caldwell looked at Claire. Claire looked back at him. And for one long moment in the underground command room of the Pentagon's Crisis Operations Center, 12 generals and 1 captain and 1 major stood together in the silence of a frequency that had gone dead. And everyone in that room understood with the clarity that only comes from an irreversible moment that the warning had arrived, but the cost of 18 minutes of disbelief was already being paid. Somewhere in the dark desert, by 3 soldiers whose names were already in Claire's memory, because she had known them not as numbers on a deployment roster. She had known them as the people who would be in the wrong position at the wrong time if the people in this room waited too long to listen. Sergeant Daniel Brooks, Corporal Jason Reed, Corporal Matthew Collins. She had known their names for 3 days. She had written them in the margin of her field map. Not because she was certain they would be lost, because she needed to remember what was at stake if she failed to be heard. And now General Caldwell was looking at her with an expression she would carry with her for the rest of her career. Not gratitude, not admiration, something harder. The look of a man who understood fully and without mitigation that he had held his judgment higher than someone else's life. Tell me what you need, he said, and Claire Whitmore opened her map and began. The radio stayed dead for 11 seconds. Miller counted them. He couldn't help it. When you work communications long enough, silence on a channel becomes something physical, something you feel in your chest. 11 seconds of nothing on a channel that should have had a voice on the other end, and every one of those seconds landed differently than the last. He tried again. Observation post Eagle, this is operations. Do you copy? Please respond. Nothing. General Caldwell moved to the communication station. He didn't push Miller aside. He stood next to him close enough that Miller could hear him breathing, and he stared at the frequency readout on the console as if looking at it hard enough would change what it was showing. Try the backup frequency, Caldwell said. Miller switched channels. Observation post Eagle, this is operations on backup channel. Respond. Static. Then nothing. General Hayes was already at the map. He put his finger on the position of observation post Eagle and then moved it to Falcon Ridge and then moved it back. His finger traveled that short distance 3 times. Like a man doing a calculation he didn't want to finish. What's the terrain between the post and the ridge, he asked. Claire was already beside him. Open ground for the first 200 meters. Then a shallow depression that provides partial cover. The observation post is positioned on the near side of that depression, so they can see the ridge. They can see the base of the ridge, Claire said, not the overhang. Hayes looked at her. You're saying they couldn't see the position. Nobody can see that overhang from ground level, Claire said. That's why it was chosen. In the corner, Torres was on a separate line. He was speaking quietly, rapidly, trying to reach the aerial support team, trying to get eyes on the observation post position from above. The thermal drone was still circling Falcon Ridge, 11 signatures still there, not moving, waiting. For what? That was the question nobody in the room was saying out loud. Waiting for what? Captain Miller leaned toward his console and widened the signal search. He was looking for any transmission, any frequency, any band, any burst signal coming from the direction of observation post Eagle. He found something. It wasn't a voice, it was a tone, a short, irregular pulse. The kind of signal that communications personnel learn in their first year means only one thing. Emergency beacon. Sir, Miller said. He kept his voice even, professional. The way you keep your voice even when you are delivering information that has weight, and you don't want the weight to come through in how you say it. I'm reading an emergency beacon signal from the observation post grid. The room went still. An emergency beacon means the soldiers couldn't use their radio. It means they activated the backup. It means something had already happened. General Caldwell stepped back from the communication station. Just one step, but it was the kind of step that happens when a person's body reacts to something before their mind has finished processing it. Get me a drone redirect, he said. Now, I need eyes on Eagle's position. Redirecting drone 4, Miller said. ETA to position 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Claire looked at the clock on the wall. 0503. 3 minutes past the missed check-in. 4 minutes until the drone reached the observation post position. 7 minutes total. She looked at the map. Then she did something none of the generals did. She started counting backwards. If the signal was activated at Euro 500, or just before it, if something happened at the same moment the check-in was missed, then whoever was on that ridge had been watching the observation post, had known its schedule, had timed their action to coincide with the moment when the post would be trying to transmit and therefore unable to respond to incoming calls. They knew the check-in schedule, Claire said. Hayes turned to look at her. Whoever is on that ridge, she said, they knew observation post Eagle checks in at Euro 500. They timed their action to that window. That information is classified, Torres said from across the room. Yes, sir, it is, Claire said, which means this isn't improvised. This was planned with access to operational details. The word nobody said landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Caldwell looked at Torres. Torres looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at Claire. She didn't look away. That's a significant claim, Major, Caldwell said. His voice was careful now, very deliberate. The easy authority was completely gone. What had replaced it was something more focused and considerably more dangerous. The voice of a man who understood that the situation was more serious than even the last 15 minutes had suggested. I know it is, sir, Claire said, but the timing isn't coincidental. You don't move 11 people into position on a cleared ridge and wait 3 days and then act at exactly the moment of a scheduled communication window without knowing that window in advance. The room was doing calculations. You could feel it. Multiple calculations happening simultaneously across 12 different minds. General Torres finished his call and set down the phone. Aerial team is 15 minutes out. Drone 4 is faster, Miller said. 2 minutes 30 seconds to position. What's the convoy status? Hayes asked. Holding at staging, said a voice from the far end of the room. All units stationary. Hayes looked at Caldwell. If there are personnel in trouble at Eagle's position, we need to consider a rescue protocol. We need to know what we're sending anyone into first, Caldwell said. Claire was looking at the map. Something was moving in the back of her mind, something she had been tracking for days that had just connected to something new. General Caldwell, she said. He turned. The beacon signal. What's the pulse pattern? Miller read it off. Short, long, short, short. Repeating. Claire was quiet for a moment. That's not the standard emergency protocol. Miller looked at her, then back at his console. You're right, he said slowly. Standard emergency beacon is 2 short, 1 long. So they modified it, Torres said. One of them did, Claire said. Someone at that post changed the pattern before activating it. Why would they do that? Hayes asked. Claire pointed at the map. Because the standard pattern is monitored. If whoever is on that ridge has enough access to know the check-in schedule, they might also know the standard beacon signature. The room absorbed that, or said very quietly, they sent a message. Claire nodded. Short, short, short. In any basic field code that translates to a direction indicator. General Caldwell stepped to the map. Which direction? South-southwest, Claire said. She put her finger on a position approximately 800 meters south-southwest of the observation post. There. Nobody spoke. Then Caldwell said, What's at that position? Claire looked at the map. According to the operational overlay, nothing. But, Hayes said, because he could hear the word in her voice before she said it. But according to my survey data from last week, Claire said there's a secondary terrain feature. A dry wash, approximately 40 meters deep, 60 meters wide. Not mapped in the current operational terrain file because it was considered non-tactical. Non-tactical, Torres repeated. It doesn't intersect any planned convoy route, Claire said. So it was categorized as irrelevant and excluded from the active terrain analysis. General Hayes put his hand on his forehead. It was the first purely physical expression of stress any of the generals had shown all night. The first crack in the professional composure. Someone is in that wash. That's what I believe, sir. How many unknown? Armed, unknown. But if they got there from the observation post position and they're trying to stay hidden from whatever is on that ridge, Then they're moving light. 1 or 2 personnel. There were 3 at Eagle, Caldwell said. Yes, sir. Nobody completed that math out loud. Caldwell straightened. He turned to Miller. How long until the drone reaches the observation post position? 90 seconds. Can you extend the sweep to include the south-southwest sector? I can. It'll slow the transit speed at about 40 seconds. Do it. Yes, sir. Claire watched the drone icon on the secondary screen move steadily toward its target. The room had changed, not just in the last 90 seconds, in the last 30 minutes. The change was in everything: the posture of the people, the pace of the conversations, the quality of the silence between sentences. 30 minutes ago, 12 generals had been operating from a position of complete certainty. The operation was sound. The corridor was clear. The intelligence was verified. Now they were waiting on a drone, waiting on a signal pulse from a modified emergency beacon, waiting to find out which of the 3 things Claire had told them were still ahead of them and which ones had already arrived. General Torres appeared at Claire's left. He was a quieter man than Hayes or Caldwell. He had spent the last several years in intelligence operations rather than field command, which meant he thought differently. He noticed different things. 14 weeks, he said, not as a challenge, as a genuine question. Yes, sir. Working from the satellite archive. The archive and the field report database. Weekly imagery comparisons going back to the beginning of the operational planning phase. And you identified the Falcon Ridge signature when 7 days ago, Claire said. Torres was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you come forward 7 days ago? It was a fair question. Claire looked at him steadily. I did, sir. I filed an intelligence addendum through the standard channel. Request for secondary terrain analysis. Falcon Ridge sector priority flagged. Torres frowned. I didn't see that addendum. No, sir, Claire said. It was recategorized by the processing team as low priority and queued for review after the operation. The silence that followed was very different from any of the silences before it. Hayes had turned from the map. It was recategorized. Yes, sir. By whom? The addendum management team, sir. Standard triage process. Intelligence requests are sorted by source priority. My file classification put my submissions in the lower triage tier. Because of your sealed file, Torres said. Because of my sealed file, Claire confirmed. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Caldwell said very quietly and without any of the contempt that had been in his voice 40 minutes ago. You knew 7 days ago. You filed the report. It was buried. And you came in here tonight with a field map because the system had already failed. Yes, sir. Caldwell looked at the wall. Not at any screen in particular, just at the wall. God help us, he said. The drone reached position. I have visual on observation post Eagle, Miller said, switching to thermal. The main screen updated. The observation post showed 2 heat signatures at the position. Not 3. 2 motionless, at a position that should have shown 3 active personnel. Where's the 3rd, Hayes said. Miller expanded the search radius, searching south-southwest. The drone swept the sector, the dry wash, the one that wasn't on the operational terrain file. The one Claire had identified from a survey map that nobody else had thought to pull. A single heat signature appeared in the wash. Motionless, but present, in the exact position Claire had predicted. One survivor, Torres said. He said it flatly, professionally, because that was the only way to say it. Caldwell turned to the room. I need rescue protocol authorization, immediate action team, and a secure extraction route to that position. Now, he paused, and I need someone to tell me who recategorized Major Whitmore's intelligence addendum. 2 people reached for phones simultaneously. Claire looked at the map, the single heat signature in the wash. A person lying still in a 40-meter depression in the desert, hiding from 11 people on a ridge above them. Waiting, the same way Claire had been waiting, for someone to listen, for someone to come. Captain Miller, Claire said. Miller looked over. He had 3 things open on his console and was managing all of them simultaneously, which was exactly the kind of task he was built for. The beacon signal, she said. Is it still transmitting? He checked. Yes, still repeating. Can you transmit back on the same frequency? Keep it below a detectable threshold for anyone monitoring from the ridge elevation. Miller thought about it for 2 seconds. Yes, with a terrain masking protocol, the ridge would block the upward signal, but we could reach the wash position. Do it, Claire said. Then she looked at Caldwell. He nodded. Miller set up the mass transmission. What do you want to send? There are 4 short pulses, Claire said. Repeat twice. What does that mean? In basic field code, we see you, we are coming. Miller looked at her for a moment. Then he set up the transmission and sent it. They waited. 30 seconds. Then the emergency beacon from the wash changed its pattern. 1 long pulse, sustained. Miller said, what does that mean? Acknowledged, Claire said. The room breathed, not loudly, not dramatically, just the collective exhale of 12 people who had been holding something very tight for the last several minutes and had been given one small reason to release part of it. General Hayes sat down. He put his elbows on the table and his hands over his face for exactly 3 seconds. Then he straightened up and he was a general again. Extraction team, timeline. Rapid response unit is 8 minutes from staging, someone said. Route, Caldwell asked. Claire was at the map. Not through the eastern corridor. That keeps them in line of sight of Falcon Ridge for 600 meters. She traced a route with her finger. Southern bypass. It adds 3 minutes but keeps the ridge between the extraction team and the active position. 11 people on that ridge, Hayes said. Yes, sir. If they see us moving on the wash position, they won't move, Claire said. Not yet. Why not? Claire looked up from the map. Because the convoy hasn't moved. The primary target is the convoy. They're not going to break their position and give themselves away for 1 survivor in a wash when they're still waiting for 8,000 personnel to come through their window. Hayes looked at her. You're saying we have a window? We have a narrow window. They're disciplined. Whatever they expected to happen at Yo 500 didn't happen because we held the convoy. They don't know why. They're waiting to see if the delay is temporary or if the operation has changed. How long do they wait? Torres asked. Unknown, but based on the preparation pattern, 3 days of positioning, high discipline, coordinated timing. These are not people who act impulsively. Claire paused. Which works in our favor for the next 12 to 15 minutes. Caldwell looked at the timer on the wall. 0511. 11 minutes past the missed check-in. 8 minutes until the extraction team could move. If we move the convoy on the southern route you identified earlier, he started. It needs to happen after the extraction, Claire said. Not simultaneously. If the convoy moves while the extraction is in progress and the ridge position spots the movement, they have 2 tactical options instead of 1. And if we wait until after the extraction to move the convoy, then we control the variables, Claire said. 1 action at a time. Extraction confirmation, then convoy movement on the revised route. General Torres looked at Caldwell. She's right. Caldwell was already moving. Extraction team hold it ready. Convoy holds position. All units maintain current status. He turned to Miller. Keep that mass transmission channel open. If the survivor in the wash transmits anything, I want to hear it immediately. Yes, sir. Caldwell then turned to Claire. Not quickly. The way someone turns when they have been deciding whether or not to do something and have finally made the decision. Walk me through the full ridge position, he said. Everything you have. Personnel count, coverage arc, likely withdrawal routes, everything. He had said the words as a general to a subordinate, but they both heard what was underneath them. He was asking because she knew, not because he outranked her, because she knew. Claire opened her map. 11 personnel, she said. Based on the thermal signatures, they're positioned in 2 groups. A primary group of 7 on the central overhang section and a secondary group of 4 approximately 30 meters to the south. She traced the positions with her finger. The 7-person group covers the primary convoy approach. The 4-person group covers the secondary approach from the south, which is the route I've recommended for the convoy bypass. Hayes moved to look at the map. They've covered both routes. They've covered both original routes, Claire said. The southern bypass I'm recommending uses a different approach angle that wasn't in the original operational plan. So they don't have coverage on it. Based on the terrain and the thermal positions known, the angle of the ridge means their coverage arc ends approximately 200 meters north of the bypass route. Torres looked at the map carefully. You're certain of this? I've run the geometry 3 times, Claire said. Yes, sir. Based on the terrain survey. Based on the terrain survey and the thermal positions we confirmed 14 minutes ago. General Hayes straightened. He looked across the map at Claire with an expression that was very different from the one he'd been wearing when she first walked in. There was no contempt in it now, no easy dismissal. What had replaced all of that was something harder to define, something that looked a lot like the specific respect that one professional feels for another professional who has done the work. Major Whitmore, he said, you said you spent 14 weeks on this. Yes, sir. Alone. Mostly, I had access to the satellite archive and the field database. One junior analyst helped me with image processing for 2 weeks, but she was reassigned before I finished the analysis. Who assigned you to this corridor? Claire paused. It was a short pause, less than a second. But Hayes caught it. Who gave you the original tasking, he said. Claire met his eyes. My file is sealed, sir. I'm not in a position to discuss the source of the tasking without authorization. Hayes looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caldwell. Caldwell was looking at Claire with the expression of a man who was beginning to understand that the situation in this room was considerably more complex than he had initially assumed. That Claire Whitmore's presence here was not an accident. That someone had put her here deliberately. That the question of who and why was something that deserved a great deal of attention once the immediate crisis was resolved. But that was not the immediate crisis. Extraction team green light on southern approach, Caldwell said. Move. Moving, came the response. The room shifted into the particular kind of focused energy that military operations rooms generate when a plan is in motion. Miller was tracking the extraction team on the secondary screen. Torres was monitoring the Falcon Ridge thermal positions. Someone at the far end of the room was coordinating with the aerial support team. And General Hayes stood at the map beside Claire. Quietly, not giving orders, not asking questions. Just standing next to her the way you stand next to the person who has been carrying the map when you finally admit you've been going the wrong way. How did you find the signal? He asked, not loudly. A quiet question between two people. I wasn't looking for a signal, Claire said. I was looking at the frequency data from the terrain monitoring stations, the ones that track atmospheric interference for the satellite imaging, and there was a pattern in the baseline data, 19-minute intervals, very subtle. Subtle enough that nobody on the intelligence team caught it. They weren't looking for it, sir. The monitoring stations aren't tasked to flag communication signals. They're tasked to flag atmospheric disturbances. This pattern registered as a minor disturbance and was automatically filtered. But you saw it. I was looking at the filtered data, Claire said, the stuff the system had already decided wasn't important. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Why would you look at filtered data? Claire looked at him. Because in my experience, sir, the things that get filtered are often the things nobody expected to matter. He nodded, very slowly. That's a particular way of thinking. Yes, sir. Takes a certain kind of mind. Takes a certain kind of patience mostly, Claire said. And there was something in her voice when she said it. Not bitterness, but something adjacent to it. The particular tiredness of a person who has spent a long time doing careful, methodical work in a system that rewards speed and authority over patience and precision. The extraction team checked in. En route, southern approach, no contact. Copy, Miller said. The Falcon Ridge thermal signatures hadn't moved. Still waiting. Still watching a convoy that hadn't appeared. 3:47. That's how much time had passed since the observation post went silent. It felt simultaneously like 3 minutes and 3 hours. That was the specific distortion that crisis rooms create. Time moves differently when every second is attached to a consequence. Extraction team approaching the wash position, Miller announced. Everyone in the room looked at the screen. The extraction team icon moved down the southern bypass route below the coverage arc of the Falcon Ridge position, invisible to the 11 people waiting on the overhang above into the wash, 30 seconds. We have visual on the survivor, the extraction team leader said through Miller's console. One personnel, conscious, ambulatory, requesting immediate medical. The room absorbed this. Identity, Caldwell said. A pause on the channel. Corporal Jason Reed, sir. Claire closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Jason Reed, one of the 3 names she had written in the margin of her field map 3 days ago. One of 3. One was in the wash, alive, which meant 2 were not. The other 2, Caldwell asked. His voice was quiet, controlled, carrying something. Sir, the extraction team leader said, and then paused in the way people pause when the next words are going to be ones nobody wants to say. We have 2 KIA at the observation post position. Confirmed. Nobody spoke. General Caldwell put his hand on the table. He kept it there. General Hayes looked at the map. General Torres turned away from his screen. The junior officers at the far end of the room had gone completely still. Captain Miller looked down at his console. His jaw tightened. Then he reached up and adjusted his headset and kept working. Claire looked at the map. Sergeant Daniel Brooks, Corporal Matthew Collins. She had known their names. She had carried their names for 3 days. Not because she had expected this, but because she had refused to allow herself the comfort of certainty that it wouldn't happen. Because in 14 weeks of watching this corridor, she had learned that the cost of optimism in her line of work was paid by someone who didn't know they were the price. Major Whitmore, Caldwell said. She looked up. His face was doing something complicated. The recalculation that had started 40 minutes ago had reached its conclusion. And the conclusion was not comfortable. It was not the kind of thing you could organize neatly into a briefing report or a lessons learned document. It lived in a place in the chest that doesn't have a military designation. I owe you an apology, he said. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Those 2 soldiers deserved better, sir, she said. We both know it. Caldwell held her gaze. Yes, he said, we do. Around them, the room kept moving. Miller was coordinating the extraction. Torres was watching the ridge. Someone was updating the convoy status. The operation was still in motion. The work didn't stop for grief. It never did. That was one of the first things you learned in this profession and one of the last things you ever got used to. But something had changed, not just in the room, in the operation. Because Claire was still looking at her map. And the thing that was moving in the back of her mind, the thing that had been there since Miller first read the modified beacon pattern, had not gone away. If anything, it had gotten stronger. Sir, she said. Caldwell turned. The 2 KIA at Eagle's position, Claire said. I need to know the casualty details. Specifically, was there any indication of a struggle, or were they found in position? Caldwell frowned. He keyed his radio and asked. The extraction team leader's response came back in 30 seconds. Found in position, sir. No signs of a struggle. Both personnel appear to have been struck from distance. Claire was already looking at the ridge angle on the map. Distance. No struggle. From the observation post position to the nearest point of Falcon Ridge. 300 meters. General Caldwell, Claire said, the ridge position. They weren't planning to ambush the convoy with the 11 personnel. The room went very quiet. Caldwell stared at her. Explain. 11 people on a ridge don't ambush an 8,000 personnel convoy directly. They don't have the firepower. They were never the primary threat. Then what are they? A trigger, Claire said. She put her finger on the map. Not on Falcon Ridge. Somewhere else. The convoy was designed to move through the Falcon Ridge corridor, she said. When it does, the ridge position activates, but not to engage the convoy directly. They signal. She moved her finger east. To here. She pointed to a location 12 kilometers east of Falcon Ridge. A location nobody had been watching. A location not in the operational overlay. A location that, as far as anyone in this room was concerned, was empty desert. What's at that position, Hayes said. Claire looked up from the map. That, she said, is what I've been trying to figure out for the last 4 days. The room was absolutely still. General Torres moved to stand beside Caldwell. Both men were looking at the location Claire had indicated on the map. It was outside the operational corridor, outside the surveillance footprint, outside the boundaries of everything that had been planned, reviewed, and approved for 11 months. You have a theory, Caldwell said, not a question. I have a pattern, Claire said. The same preparation signatures I found at Falcon Ridge, the soil displacement, the organized track patterns, appear in the satellite archive for that grid position. First appearance 9 days ago. 9 days ago, Hayes repeated. Before I found the Falcon Ridge signatures, Claire said. I found that location first, but I couldn't identify what was there because the imagery resolution was insufficient for that sector. Why was the resolution insufficient? Torres asked. Because the satellite coverage for that sector is on a 16-hour cycle, Claire said. It's outside the high-priority coverage window. Torres looked at Caldwell. We need to pull extended coverage for that sector. We need more than coverage, Claire said. We need a second drone, thermal sweep of that entire grid. The operational drone fleet is allocated, someone said from the far end of the room. I know, Claire said, which is why I'm telling you now so you can reallocate. There was a beat, a moment where the old dynamic, the one from 45 minutes ago, tried to reassert itself. The instinct to push back, to question the request, to route it through the appropriate channels and let the appropriate people make the appropriate decisions. General Caldwell cut through it before it could take hold. Drone reallocation, he said. Sector 12 East, thermal sweep, priority 1. He turned to Claire. What else do you need? And in that question, 4 words spoken by the most senior officer in the room to a major with a sealed file and a handwritten map. The entire weight of the last hour was present. Not just the threat on the ridge, not just the 2 soldiers in the desert, not just the convoy holding in the dark, all of it. The 14 weeks of work nobody had seen, the report that had been buried, the 18 minutes of silence. All of it lived in those 4 words. What else do you need? Claire looked at the map, at the position 12 kilometers east, at the thing she didn't know yet but was beginning to understand the shape of. I need the satellite archive for that sector, she said. Everything from the last 30 days, and I need 30 minutes. Caldwell looked at her. You have 20. Claire pulled her chair to the table, and she started. 20 minutes. That was what Caldwell had given her. Claire pulled the satellite archive onto the secondary screen and started moving through it the way a surgeon moves through a procedure, not fast, not slow, but with the specific rhythm of someone who knows exactly what they are looking for and exactly how much time they have to find it. 0519 on the clock. 19 minutes since the observation post went silent. The extraction team had Corporal Reed. He was alive. He was moving. The medical team was already prepping at the staging area. That was one thing that had gone right in the last 19 minutes, and Claire held on to it the way you hold on to the one solid thing in a room that is shaking. But she wasn't thinking about Reed right now. She was thinking about Sector 12 East. The satellite archive loaded in segments. 30 days of imagery. Claire started from the beginning, 9 days ago. The first appearance of the preparation signatures she had identified. General Hayes pulled a chair next to her without asking. She didn't tell him to move. He sat quietly and watched the screen. Not asking questions, not directing, just present. The way someone sits beside a person doing delicate work close enough to be useful, far enough to stay out of the way. What am I looking at? He said. Tell me what you see, Claire said. First impression. Hayes looked at the imagery. Open desert, flat terrain with the occasional scrub vegetation and rock formations. Nothing remarkable. Nothing, he said. That's what the processing team said, Claire replied. She advanced the archive to the next day. Now, Bob. Hayes looked. Still nothing. She advanced again. Day 7. Now, Borso Antenna. He leaned in, squinted, looked at a particular section of the terrain near the eastern edge of the image. The shadows are different. The shadows are different, Claire said. She zoomed in. The rock formation in the northeast quadrant of the frame had shadows that didn't match the sun angle. The sun was at 11 degrees elevation when this image was taken, Claire said. At that angle, these rocks should be casting shadows to the northwest. They're casting them south, Hayes said. Because they're not rocks, Claire said. She let that sit for 1 second. Then she said, they're covers, material designed to match the terrain profile. But whoever positioned them didn't account for the sun angle variation at this latitude in this season. Hayes stared at the image. Someone covered something. Something large, Claire said. She traced the shadow outline with her finger on the screen. Based on the shadow dimensions, approximately 6 meters by 4 meters. Maybe larger. A vehicle, Hayes said. Or multiple vehicles, Claire said. She advanced the archive again. Day 8. The shadows were gone. Whoever had positioned the covers had corrected the angle. They fixed it, Hayes said. The next day, Claire confirmed, which means someone was monitoring the satellite coverage schedule and identified the error within 24 hours. Hayes was very quiet for a moment. That's sophisticated operational awareness, he said. Yes, sir. That's not an improvised threat. No, sir, it is not. Caldwell appeared behind them. He had been listening from 2 steps back. Claire had known he was there. What size vehicle produces a shadow profile of 6 meters by 4? Heavy transport, Claire said. Or multiple light vehicles in close formation. She paused. Or a mobile launch platform. The word landed differently than the words before it. General Torres moved closer from across the room. A mobile launch platform in Sector 12 East, Caldwell said slowly. I can't confirm it from the imagery alone, Claire said. But the size profile, the concealment, methodology, the location in relation to the convoy route. She pulled up the operational map alongside the archive imagery. She lined them up. She pointed at Sector 12 East. Then she drew a line from that position to the convoy's planned route through the Falcon Ridge corridor. The line was exactly 18 kilometers. That's extreme range for most portable systems, Torres said. For most, Claire said. The room understood. Hayes put both hands flat on the table. If there's a mobile platform at that position and the convoy moves through Falcon Ridge. Falcon Ridge is the targeting reference point, Claire said. The ridge position activates the platform. The platform engages the convoy at range before any ground-based response is possible. The 11 people on the ridge aren't the weapon, Torres said. They're the trigger. They're the targeting system, Claire said. Someone on that ridge has line of sight to the convoy approach. They relay the targeting data to Sector 12 East. The platform fires from a position outside our surveillance footprint. General Caldwell turned away from the table. He put his hand over his mouth. He stood like that for 3 seconds. Just 3 seconds. But it was a very specific 3 seconds. The kind that happens when a person in command realizes that the scope of what they are dealing with is not what they thought it was. That the threat they were managing 45 minutes ago has just expanded into something categorically different. 523. How long has this platform been in position? He asked. He was still looking at the wall, his back to the room. Based on the archive data, at least 8 days, Claire said. 8 days, he said. Yes, sir. He turned around. His face had settled into something flat and extremely focused. The kind of expression that doesn't feel anything right now because it can't afford to. And the intelligence team missed it. The intelligence team was tasked to cover the operational corridor, Claire said. Sector 12 East is 12 kilometers outside the corridor boundary. It wasn't in the surveillance tasking. Because we designed the surveillance footprint based on the convoy route, Hayes said. And someone knew the convoy route, Claire said, and positioned accordingly. The room was doing that calculation again. The one nobody wanted to finish. Someone knew the convoy route. Someone knew the check-in schedule. Someone knew the surveillance footprint boundary. And someone had positioned a mobile platform exactly 12 kilometers outside that boundary and waited 8 days. Captain Miller, Caldwell said. Miller looked up from his console. He had been tracking the extraction team and monitoring the Falcon Ridge thermal signatures simultaneously, and his face showed the particular focus of a person managing too many things at once, but managing them all correctly. Sir, the drone reallocation I ordered. Status. Drone 2 is redirecting to Sector 12 East now, sir. ETA 6 minutes. Can you get it there in 4? I can push the transit speed. Yes, sir. Push it. Yes, sir. Claire advanced the satellite archive to the most recent image. Day 9, the last available frame before the current moment. The coverage area near the eastern edge of Sector 12 East showed something new, something that hadn't been there on Day 1 or Day 8. A second shadow anomaly, smaller than the first, approximately 2 meters by 2 meters, positioned approximately 30 meters from the first location. A second object. There are 2 of them, Claire said. The room went quiet again, that particular quiet that kept recurring throughout the night. Not the comfortable quiet of a room full of people who agree. The uncomfortable quiet of a room full of people who are absorbing something they didn't prepare for. 2 platforms, Torres said. Or 1 platform and a support vehicle, Claire said. I can't determine configuration from this imagery. I need the thermal data. 4 minutes on the drone, Miller said. 4 minutes. Hayes looked at the clock. If whatever is in Sector 12 East has been positioned for 8 days and is expecting the convoy to move through the Falcon Ridge corridor. It was expecting the convoy at 0500, Claire said. Silence. The convoy didn't move at 0500, Hayes continued. No, sir. So whatever is at that position is waiting, same as the ridge. Yes, sir. But unlike the ridge position, Hayes said carefully, we have no idea whether the platform at 12 East has external monitoring capability. Meaning, Claire said, we don't know if they know the convoy has been delayed. Hayes looked at Caldwell. If they know the convoy is delayed and they're mobile, they relocate, Torres said, and we lose them entirely, Hayes said. The 4 minutes suddenly felt very short. If they haven't been alerted, Claire said, they're still waiting, disciplined, stationary, the same as the ridge position. But if they have been alerted, Caldwell started, then the drone either confirms their departure or catches them in transit, Claire said. Either way, we need the thermal data. 3 minutes on the drone, Miller said. Caldwell turned to Torres. If we confirm a mobile platform at 12 East, I need immediate options for neutralization before they can reposition. Torres was already moving to the operational planning station. Aerial strike or ground interdiction. Both, simultaneously if possible. I want options on the table before that drone reaches position. Sir, Torres said and got to work. General Hayes turned back to Claire. He had not moved from the chair beside her. He was the only general in the room who had stayed in one place throughout the last 30 minutes. Everyone else had been moving to phones, to consoles, to other screens. Hayes had been sitting next to Claire. I want to ask you something, he said. His voice was low, not a command voice, a conversation voice. Sir, Claire said. This sealed file of yours, he said. I'm not going to ask you to break protocol, but I want to understand something. Claire looked at him. Somebody sent you here, he said. Not through the standard intelligence assignment process. Your addendum was buried. You didn't come in through the front door of this operation. You came in through a back channel. Claire said nothing. Whoever sent you, Hayes continued, they knew you'd find something. They knew what was here. A pause. Which means someone with access to the intelligence pipeline on this operation had concerns serious enough to task you independently. Sir, Claire said carefully, I can confirm that I was tasked independently. But not by whom? Not by whom? Hayes nodded. He accepted this. He didn't push. But the look on his face said clearly that this conversation was not finished. That when the immediate crisis was resolved, the question of who had known what and when, and who had buried an intelligence addendum from a sealed file analyst 3 days before a catastrophic operation was going to be examined with considerable thoroughness. 2 minutes, Miller said. The room had 2 distinct zones of activity now. Torres and 2 other officers working the response options at the planning station. Miller and his communications team tracking everything in motion. And at the secondary screen, Claire and Hayes, the only 2 people in the room looking backward into the archive while everyone else looked forward at the response. Walk me through the preparation signatures again, Hayes said. Not the technical details, the pattern. Claire looked at the archive imagery. Whoever designed this operation was thinking in layers, she said. The outer layer is Sector 12 East, remote outside the surveillance boundary concealed. That's the primary strike capability. And the second layer is Falcon Ridge, the triggering and targeting system, Claire confirmed. But there's a third layer. Hayes turned to look at her directly. Claire moved to the operational map. She traced the convoy route from its starting position to the Falcon Ridge corridor. She moved her finger past the ridge, past Sector 12 East, to a point 8 kilometers further east. What did you see there? Hayes asked. Nothing, Claire said. And that's the problem. She looked at him. In 14 weeks of watching this corridor, the terrain between the start point in Sector 12 East has shown consistent normal variation. Vegetation, wildlife signatures, atmospheric interference, everything that you expect from active desert terrain. But the section 8 kilometers east of 12 East, Hayes said, has been completely static, Claire said. No variation for 14 weeks. Hayes was very still. A dead zone. Artificially static terrain, Claire said, which in 14 weeks of satellite archive means one of 2 things. Either nothing lives in that sector and nothing moves through it and nothing happens there ever. Or someone has been suppressing the environmental signature, Hayes said. Someone has been making it look like nothing is happening there, Claire said, by ensuring that nothing happens there. No movement, no activity, no heat signatures, a blank sector. A staging area, Hayes said. I think it's a withdrawal route, Claire said. If the operation at Falcon Ridge succeeds and the platform at 12 East fires on the convoy, the withdrawal doesn't go back the way they came. It goes east, through the dead zone, through a corridor that has been kept deliberately clear for 14 weeks, Claire said. Clean exit, no trace in the archive, no surveillance footprint. They came in and they were planning to go out through a path nobody was watching because nothing ever happens there. Hayes looked at the map, at Sector 12 East, at the dead zone to the east, at the withdrawal corridor that had been built into this operation as carefully as the ridge position in the platform. This isn't a field exercise, he said quietly. No, sir, Claire said. It's not. 1 minute on drone 2, Miller announced. The room reconverged on the main screen. Torres was behind his planning station, but had come forward to watch the thermal feed. Caldwell was standing at the center of the room with his arms crossed, watching the drone icon on the secondary screen move toward the target position. The room counted down without counting out loud. 45 seconds. 30. 15. Thermal imaging active, Miller said. Drone 2 over Sector 12 East. Processing. The main screen updated, and the room went absolutely silent. 2 heat signatures appeared on the thermal display. Not large, not vehicle scale, human scale. 2 people, stationary, positioned close together, near the location of the shadow anomaly from the archive. No vehicle signatures, no platform, nothing 6 meters by 4 meters, nothing. Just 2 people in an empty desert. Torres said it first. Where's the platform? They moved it, someone said from across the room, when Caldwell's voice was sharp. The drone just expand the thermal radius, Claire said to Miller. Miller expanded the search radius. The thermal display widened. The 2 human signatures stayed where they were. And at the edge of the expanded radius, at the very limit of the drone's thermal resolution, 2 larger signatures appeared. Moving east. There, Claire said. They're relocating, Torres said. How long ago? Caldwell asked. Based on the distance from their original position, Claire said 15 to 20 minutes. The room absorbed that 15 to 20 minutes ago, which was approximately when the convoy failed to move at 0500 and didn't move at 0505 or 0510. They knew the convoy was delayed, Hayes said. They have a timer, Claire said. The convoy was scheduled at 0500. When it didn't move in the first 10 minutes, they started their withdrawal protocol. While we were in here figuring out what happened at Eagle, Caldwell said. While we were in here, Claire confirmed, the 2 people on thermal, they're the rear guard, left behind to cover the withdrawal and confirm the platform has cleared the area. Caldwell moved fast. Torres, aerial strike option. Can we intercept the platform before it reaches the dead zone corridor? Torres was already at the planning station. The aerial team is 15 minutes out from Sector 12 East. If the platform has a 15-minute head start and it's moving east, it'll be in the dead zone before we get there, Hayes said. Not necessarily, Claire said. Everyone looked at her. She was at the map. Her finger was tracing a route north of the dead zone. The withdrawal corridor runs east-west. It's clear because it's been kept clear, no obstacles, no terrain features. Fast movement. Right, Torres said. But it's narrow, Claire said. The archive shows the static zone is approximately 4 kilometers wide, which means the platform is moving through a very specific corridor, and the northern boundary of that corridor, she pointed, passes within 6 kilometers of current aerial asset position. Torres looked at the map, looked at the aerial team's current position. If they divert north, they can intercept the corridor exit, Claire said, before the platform clears the dead zone and disperses into open terrain. Torres moved immediately. Aerial team new tasking, north intercept grid. He read the coordinates off the map. Caldwell was watching Claire. You know that dead zone corridor because you spent 14 weeks watching what didn't move. Yes, sir. He looked at her for one long moment. I want you to know, he said, that I understand what it costs to bring this information into this room. What it took to walk through that door knowing how you'd be received. Claire held his gaze. I wasn't thinking about how I'd be received, sir. I know, he said. That's the point. I've 37 minutes since the observation post went dark. The extraction team had Corporal Reed at the medical station. The Falcon Ridge thermal signatures had still not moved. 11 people on a ridge waiting for a convoy that wasn't coming. The aerial team was diverting north on a new intercept vector. And in the secondary screen, the thermal signatures of the mobile platform were moving east through the dead zone corridor unknown to their operators That the woman who had found them 8 days before they were ready was watching them move in real time. Miller spoke. Sir, I'm reading a new signal from Sector 12 East. The rear guard, Torres asked. No, sir. Different frequency. Burst transmission. Very short. Claire turned. What frequency? Miller read it off. Claire looked at the clock, looked at the map, looked at the Falcon Ridge thermal display showing 11 people who hadn't moved. They just reported in, she said. Caldwell frowned. Reported in to whom? To someone who isn't in Sector 12 East or on Falcon Ridge, Claire said. Someone who's monitoring the operation from a third position. The room went cold. Not literally, but that specific cold that hits a room of experienced people when they realize the problem has just grown another dimension. A command element, Hayes said. A coordination element, Claire said. Someone who is receiving status reports from the ridge, the platform, and whoever is managing the dead zone corridor. We've been watching the execution team, Torres said. There's a command layer we haven't found. There's always a command layer, Claire said. I just haven't had time to find it. Caldwell looked at her. Can you find it from that signal? If Miller can trace the transmission target, yes. Captain Miller, Caldwell said. Miller was already working. The burst was short, less than 2 seconds, but the signal has a direction. Which direction? Claire asked. Miller looked up from his console. He looked at Claire. He looked at the map. He said the direction. And General Hayes made a sound that wasn't a word, just a sound, the kind of person makes when something they have been carefully not thinking about is suddenly confirmed. Because the direction Miller gave wasn't toward Sector 12 East. It wasn't toward Falcon Ridge. It wasn't toward the dead zone corridor. It was toward the staging area. The area where 8,000 American personnel were currently holding position, waiting for the convoy order to resume. The command element wasn't outside the operation. It was inside it. The silence lasted 4 seconds, 4 full seconds, where 12 generals and 1 captain and 1 major stood in an underground command room and did the specific mathematics of what it meant for the coordination signal to be coming from within the staging area. Then Caldwell said, nobody leaves the staging area. His voice was completely flat, completely controlled. All personnel in staging are to remain in current position. No movement without direct authorization from this room. Lock it down. Sir, someone started. Lock it down, Caldwell said. Now. Miller had 3 channels open simultaneously. The lockdown order moved outward. 14 different unit commanders receiving the order within 90 seconds. 8,000 people freezing in place. If there's a coordination element inside the staging area, Torres said carefully, they're going to know something has changed. Yes, they will, Caldwell said, which means we have a very short window to locate them before they understand the operation has been compromised. Claire, Caldwell said. It was the first time he had used her name. Not Major Whitmore, not Major, Claire. She looked at him. The signal Miller traced, he said. Can you narrow it to a position inside the staging area? Claire moved to Miller's station. She stood behind him reading the signal data on his screen. The transmission had been 2 seconds long. The direction was confirmed. The distance calculation based on signal strength put the origin point within the staging area boundary. But the staging area was 4 kilometers across. I need a second transmission, she said, to triangulate. We can't wait for them to transmit again, Hayes said. No, Claire agreed. We need to make them transmit. Caldwell looked at her. How the Falcon Ridge position, Claire said. They're waiting, 11 people on a ridge who expected a convoy at 0500. It's now 0540. They've been holding for 40 minutes. You want to send them a signal, Torres said. I want to make the command element think the convoy is resuming, Claire said. If they believe the convoy delay is ending, they'll send a coordination signal to the ridge. And when they do, we triangulate, Miller said. He was already looking at the technical setup. I can get a position to within 200 meters with a second transmission. 200 meters is still a large area, Hayes said. It's a manageable area, Claire said. With the staging area locked down and everyone holding position, a 200-meter search radius will find them. Caldwell looked at the clock. 0541. If we generate a false convoy start signal and the coordination element inside staging sends a confirmation to Falcon Ridge. They give themselves away, Claire said. And if the Falcon Ridge position responds to the false signal by activating, Caldwell said, before we've neutralized them. We have a drone with thermal tracking over the ridge, Claire said, and the convoy isn't moving. There's nothing for them to activate against. The room processed this. Torres said, it's a controlled provocation. It's the fastest way to find the command element, Claire said. Caldwell looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at Claire. What's your confidence level? Hayes asked. Not dismissively, not doubtfully. The way you ask a question when you respect the answer and need it to be accurate. Claire held his gaze for a moment. High enough that I'm recommending it, she said. Hayes looked at Caldwell. Caldwell looked at the clock, at the map, at the thermal display showing 11 people on a ridge and 2 heat signatures moving east through a corridor, in the blank void of the staging area where someone was embedded inside 8,000 American personnel. Generate the false convoy start signal, he said. All surveillance assets on maximum sensitivity. In the moment a transmission originates from inside that staging area, I want a position. Miller moved with the efficiency of someone who has been building toward this moment for the last hour. He set up the false signal parameters. He aligned the surveillance assets. He opened the triangulation protocol. Ready? He said. Caldwell looked at Claire. She nodded. Send it, Caldwell said. The false convoy start signal went out at 0542. It took 11 seconds for whoever was inside the staging area to receive the signal and process it and decide to act. 11 seconds, and then a burst transmission originated from inside the staging area boundary. Miller had it instantly. Triangulating. His hands moved across the console. Cross-referencing signal strength, bearing time of arrival. The room watched the screen. A position appeared. A specific position inside the staging area. Coordinates. Miller read them out loud. Claire was at the operational map before he finished speaking. She found the position, a specific section of the staging area, a specific unit designation. She looked at it, then she turned around, and the expression on her face stopped everyone in the room. Not panic, not shock, something much quieter and much more serious than either of those things. Sir, she said. Caldwell moved to the map. He looked at the position. He looked at the unit designation. He said very quietly, that's a communications unit. Yes, sir, Claire said. That's our communications unit. Yes, sir, Claire said. The same unit that manages the operational frequency distribution for Iron Horizon. The same unit that knew every channel, every check-in schedule, every frequency that Operation Iron Horizon used. The same unit that would have known exactly what frequencies to avoid when the Falcon Ridge positions set up their non-standard signal. The same unit that had access to the addendum management system that had recategorized Claire's intelligence report as low priority. Caldwell stood very still. In the last 43 minutes, he had held a convoy, confirmed an ambush position, authorized an extraction, discovered a concealed mobile platform, identified a withdrawal corridor, and locked down a staging area. But this was different. This wasn't an external threat that had penetrated an operation. This was the operation itself, someone inside it, someone trusted, someone with access. Lock that position, Caldwell said. Physical lock. Nobody in or out. I want security personnel at that location in the next 3 minutes. Sir, a voice across the room said immediately. And I want every communication that has passed through that unit in the last 30 days pulled and held for review. Sir, Caldwell turned to the room. He looked at the generals around him, men he had worked with for years, men he trusted, men who were now looking at him with the specific expression of people who understood that the operation they had been running for 11 months had been compromised from the inside. He turned to Claire. She was looking at the map, still working. Her pen was moving across the field map, adding a new notation, a new data point. Major Whitmore, he said. She looked up. Is there anything else, he said. Is there anything else in this operation that I don't know about? Claire looked at the map, at the positions she had marked over 14 weeks, at the annotations in the margins, at the names in the corner. She looked at Caldwell. Give me the rest of the night, she said, and I'll tell you everything I know. Caldwell held her gaze for a long moment. Then he pulled out a chair. He sat down across the table from her. Start talking, he said, and in the underground command room with the clock reading 0544 and the Arizona desert holding its breath around 8,000 stationary personnel and 11 people on a ridge in a mobile platform, moving east in a coordination element, about to discover it had been found. Claire Whitmore opened her field map to the first page. The page she had started on day one, 14 weeks ago, lone, and she began at the beginning. Not because it was the most dramatic place to begin, not because it would impress anyone in the room, but because 14 weeks of work had a logic to it, and that logic started at the beginning. And if Caldwell wanted to understand what had actually happened, what was still happening, he needed to follow the same path Claire had followed in the same order at the same pace. 5:44 on the clock. Caldwell sat across the table from her. He had not called for coffee. He had not checked his phone. He had not looked at the other generals or gestured for anyone else to sit down or stand up or do anything at all. He was simply present, both hands flat on the table, eyes on Claire, in the way that men who have spent 30 years giving orders look when they have finally decided that listening is the only useful thing they can do. General Hayes sat 2 chairs to Caldwell's left. Torres was still at the planning station, but had angled himself so he could hear. Miller was at his console, 3 channels still open, but he had lowered the volume on 2 of them. Everyone was listening. 14 weeks ago, Claire said, I was given a tasking through a non-standard channel. The tasking was simple. Watch the Iron Horizon operational corridor and report any anomalies. Who gave you that tasking? Caldwell asked. I'll get to that, Claire said. Let me walk you through what I found first, because the who matters less than the why, and the why only makes sense after the what. Caldwell accepted this. He nodded once. The first 2 weeks, Claire said, I found nothing. The corridor was exactly what the operational plan said it was. Open terrain, predictable satellite coverage, standard atmospheric patterns. She turned to the first page of her map. Dense notations. Week 3, I started looking at the data that had been filtered out of the standard reporting. The low-priority files. The minor atmospheric anomalies. The small signal variations that the processing system had categorized as irrelevant. The filtered data, Hayes said. The filtered data, Claire confirmed. And in week 3, I found the first thing. She turned the map toward Caldwell. He looked at it. A notation in the northwest corner of the operational corridor. A date, a frequency reading, a small arrow pointing toward what would later become the Falcon Ridge position. A signal, Caldwell said. A faint signal, Claire said. So faint that the processing system had classified it as background electromagnetic noise. The kind of interference you get from geological formations with high mineral content. But it wasn't geological interference, Torres said from across the room. It was a test transmission, Claire said, someone checking the frequency outside the standard monitoring band. And I almost missed it because it appeared once and didn't repeat for 11 days. 11 days, Hayes said. You held on to one data point for 11 days. I flagged it in my working file, Claire said, and I kept watching. General Torres had moved closer now. He was standing behind Caldwell, reading the map over his shoulder. When did it repeat? Day 22, Claire said. Same frequency, but this time with a direction component, a very subtle directional bias in the signal that indicated the transmission origin was moving, not a fixed position. A mobile source, Torres said. A mobile source running a route through the corridor, Claire said. I tracked the signal pattern for the next 6 days. It moved in a consistent circuit, starting from the east, moving west through the corridor and returning east. She traced the route on the map with her finger. Every time it passed through the sector, it ran a brief transmission. Testing coverage. Testing whether the signal could be detected at various positions within the corridor. The room was completely quiet now. Someone was mapping our detection capability, Hayes said. Someone was finding our blind spots, Claire said. Yeah. Every position where the signal went undetected became a confirmed blind spot in our surveillance coverage. After 6 days of this circuit, they had a complete picture of every gap in the monitoring architecture. Caldwell's jaw tightened. That's intelligence collection inside our own operational boundary. Yes, sir. Before the operation even began. The operation was in final planning phase, Claire said. The operational order had been distributed to 47 personnel by that point. The math was not comfortable. The person running that route had access to the operational order, Torres said. Or they had access to someone who did, Claire said. Caldwell looked at her. Week 3 into a 14-week watch. You found this in week 3, and you filed a report. Week 4, Claire said. I waited one additional week to compile enough data to support the claim. I filed through the standard intelligence channel, priority flagged, and it was recategorized, Hayes said. It was recategorized as low priority and queued for post-operation review, Claire said. Yes, sir. Caldwell's expression did not change, but something moved behind his eyes, something that was rapidly recalculating the sequence of events from the last 11 months. Who had received the report? Who had made the recategorization decision? Who had the authority to flag an intelligence addendum as low priority, and what it meant that they had used that authority on this particular addendum at this particular time. Keep going, he said. Week 5, Claire said. She turned to the next page of her map. The circuit pattern stopped. The mobile source disappeared from the corridor. For 17 days, nothing. They went quiet, Torres said. They finished their reconnaissance, Claire said. They knew what they needed to know. There was no further requirement to run the circuit. She looked at the map. But in week 6, something new appeared. Static signals, fixed positions, not mobile, beginning to establish a permanent presence. The ridge, Hayes said. Not yet, Claire said. The first fixed signals were further east, near Sector 12 East. She let that land. The platform position. The thing they had found tonight 8 days into its operational deployment, but Claire had found the precursor signals 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, Caldwell said quietly. The fixed signals at 12 East ran for 4 days, Claire said. Then they stopped, and when they stopped, there was a new signature in the terrain imagery, a very faint one, a slight soil disturbance pattern consistent with ground preparation work. They were building something, Torres said. They were preparing the position, Claire said, grading the approach, clearing concealment obstacles, doing the foundational work before the equipment arrived. She turned to page 3 of the map. I filed a second report at the end of week 6, more detailed than the first. I included the frequency data, the terrain analysis, and a preliminary assessment that the corridor was being prepared for an operation targeting Iron Horizon. And that report, Caldwell said, was recategorized as low priority, Claire said. Same determination as the first. Insufficient source credibility. Insufficient source credibility. The words fell into the room like something heavy dropped from a height. Insufficient source credibility, Hayes repeated. His voice had changed. The professional control was still there, but there was something underneath it that wasn't controlled at all, based on your file classification. Based on my sealed file, Claire said, which put my submissions in the lowest triage tier. Reports from sealed file analysts are automatically flagged for secondary review before any action is taken. The secondary review has a 48-hour processing window. After 48 hours, if no action has been taken, the report is automatically recategorized. Who set up that triage protocol? Hayes asked. Claire paused. Who set up that protocol, Major Whitmore? Hayes said again, and his voice had an edge to it now that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. The triage protocol was established by the Intelligence Management Division, Claire said carefully. It was implemented 18 months ago, approximately 4 months before Iron Horizon entered its final planning phase. The room went very quiet. 18 months ago, 4 months before Iron Horizon. General Torres made a sound that wasn't quite a word. He turned back toward the planning station, and the movement had a rigidity to it that told Claire he was processing something he didn't want to say out loud yet. Caldwell leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, not because there was anything to see there, because sometimes a person needs to look at something that isn't another human face for a few seconds while they absorb the shape of something very large. Who runs the Intelligence Management Division, he asked. Brigadier General Warren Stahl, Torres said from across the room. His voice was flat, professional, carrying nothing. Caldwell looked at Torres. Torres looked back at him. Hayes looked at both of them. Nobody said the thing that all three of them were thinking, because thinking it and saying it were very different actions with very different consequences. And in a room with this many people present, the difference mattered. Keep going, Caldwell said to Claire. Week 8, Claire said. The terrain signatures at 12 East became more complex. I identified 2 separate preparation zones within the sector, which is when I started to believe there were 2 systems rather than one. And in week 8, the first Falcon Ridge signatures appeared. 2 months before tonight, Hayes said. 8 weeks before the operational start date, Claire said. Someone had planned this operation on a timeline that paralleled Iron Horizon's planning phase almost exactly. They started when we started, Torres said. Or before, Claire said. Because the reconnaissance circuit I identified in week 3 was almost certainly not the beginning. It was the confirmation phase. By the time I started watching the corridor, the planning for what happened tonight was already well advanced. Caldwell brought his hand down on the table. Not a slam, a controlled, deliberate action. The kind a person uses to anchor themselves when the ground beneath them is moving. 556. 12 minutes had passed since Claire began. 12 minutes of information that was restructuring everything Caldwell thought he understood about Operation Iron Horizon. The sealed file, he said. He came back to it the way a person returns to a wound that keeps demanding attention. 4 years ago, tell me what happened. Claire was quiet for a moment. This was the part she didn't talk about. The part that lived in the sealed portion of her personnel record. The part that had frozen her career and buried her assignments and put her name in the lowest triage tier of the intelligence management system. But Caldwell had said, tell me. And Caldwell was the commanding officer of an operation that had just revealed a layer of compromise that went deeper than anyone in this room had been prepared for tonight. And Claire had walked through his door at 2 a.m. because she had decided weeks ago, sitting alone with a satellite archive and a handwritten map, that the truth was more important than her comfort. 4 years ago, she said, I was assigned to an intelligence unit supporting a strike operation in a classified theater. The target package had been developed over 6 weeks by a team of 8 analysts. You were on the team, Hayes said. I was the junior analyst, Claire said. My job was to verify the imagery data supporting the target identification. She looked at the map, not at any particular notation, just at the paper. 3 days before the strike was scheduled, I found an error in the target package. What kind of error? Caldwell asked. The primary target structure had been identified based on a signal signature that matched a specific communications profile, Claire said. But when I ran the imagery comparison against the historical archive, the structure in the target photos didn't match the structure that had generated the signal. A different building, Torres said. A different building. The signal had been generated from a building approximately 200 meters north of the target. The target itself was a residential structure. The room was completely still. You flagged it, Hayes said. I flagged it immediately, Claire said, to my supervisor, who took it to the team lead, who reviewed it and determined that my analysis was incorrect, that the imagery comparison methodology I had used was not the approved verification protocol. They overruled you, Caldwell said. They overruled me, Claire said, and they scheduled the strike. A pause. I filed an objection through the formal channel, she said. I requested a 24-hour delay to run a secondary verification. The request was denied, and the night before the strike, I made a decision. You went above the team lead, Hayes said. I went to the deputy commander of the operation, Claire said. At 11 o'clock at night, without authorization, without going through my chain of command. And what happened? Caldwell asked. He delayed the strike, Claire said, and ran the secondary verification. And the target was wrong, Claire said. The signal had been a relay transmission. The actual source was the building 200 meters north, a confirmed command communications hub. The silence after that was very long. The strike would have hit a residential building, Hayes said, with a civilian population, Claire confirmed. The secondary verification identified 43 non-combatant occupants, 43 people. The number moved through the room the way significant numbers always move through a room full of people who understand consequences. Not loudly, but with weight. You saved 43 lives, Torres said. I prevented the strike, Claire said. The deputy commander made the decision. I gave him the information. But your chain of command filed a conduct complaint, Caldwell said. 3 complaints, Claire said. Bypassing chain of command, unauthorized access to the deputy commander, compromising operational security. She looked at Caldwell. My file was sealed pending review. The review has been pending for 4 years. Because the team lead whose target package you invalidated, Hayes said, and his voice had gone very careful and very deliberate, had influence over the review process. Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. Caldwell looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at Torres. Torres was very carefully not looking at anyone. Who was the team lead? Caldwell asked. Claire looked at him steadily. The Intelligence Management Division has a deputy director who joined from the field 4 years ago, she said. After a conduct review in which his target package methodology was questioned, the room connected the dots without her completing them. Caldwell stood up from his chair. He walked to the far side of the room. He stood there for several seconds with his back to everyone, looking at the operational map on the wall. At the position of the communications unit inside the staging area, at the Falcon Ridge thermal display, at the convoy route that ran through the corridor that someone had spent months preparing to destroy. When he turned around, his face had made a decision. Captain Miller, he said. Miller looked up. Sir, I need a secure line into the Inspector General's office. Priority classification. Open it now and keep it open. Yes, sir. And I need someone to pull the complete personnel file on Brigadier General Washington Stahl. Everything, not the summary, the complete file. Sir, someone across the room said immediately. Torres, Caldwell said. Sir? The communications unit position we locked down. I want to know who authorized their deployment to that specific sector of the staging area. Torres nodded once and moved to his station. Hayes stood up from his chair. He walked to where Claire was sitting. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her field map, at 14 weeks of work laid out in handwritten notations across worn paper. Someone sent you here, he said quietly. Just to her. Just between them. Yes, sir, Claire said. The deputy commander, Hayes said, from 4 years ago. Claire was quiet. He's been watching, Hayes said, watching the operation develop, watching the intelligence suppression. And when it became clear that the system wasn't going to catch it, he needed someone outside the system, Claire said. Someone whose file was sealed, Hayes said, which meant someone whose reports would be automatically suppressed if the triage protocol worked as designed, but also someone who would know exactly how to work around the suppression. Claire looked at him. He didn't tell me about the triage protocol. I figured that out in week 4 when my first report disappeared. Hayes made a sound that was almost a laugh, not a happy one. The kind that comes out when something terrible has also been in some very specific way extraordinary. So you adapted. I started keeping a parallel record, Claire said. Everything I found I documented in the map, so that even if every formal report was suppressed, the work existed somewhere they couldn't recategorize. Hayes looked at the map. And then you came in here tonight. When the timeline reached the operational window, Claire said. Yes, sir. Knowing how you'd be received. Claire looked at him. I wasn't thinking about that, sir. I was thinking about the convoy. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then he said very quietly, I owe you an apology, Major, for how this room received you. General Hayes. Not as a formality, he said, as a fact. I sat in that room and I let the dynamic define my response. I should have listened faster. Claire held his gaze. You listened when it mattered, sir. 2 soldiers are dead, he said. She didn't answer. Because there was nothing to say. Not because she was indifferent, but because she had been carrying those names for 3 days, and she understood in a way that couldn't be expressed in this room, or possibly in any room, that the grief of it was real and the accountability for it was real, and neither of those things canceled the other out. 603, aerial team, Miller announced. They have visual on the platform. The room turned. Thermal confirmation, 2 large vehicle signatures on the north intercept vector. They've cut off the corridor or exit. The platform is contained, Caldwell said. Contained and identified, Miller said. Sir, the aerial team reports the platform configuration is consistent with a mobile precision strike system, long-range capable. Caldwell looked at Claire. She had said mobile launch platform 3 hours ago. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Authorization for interdiction, Torres asked. Granted, Caldwell said immediately. Coordinate with aerial team. I want that platform neutralized before it can reposition. Yes, sir. In the Falcon Ridge position, Caldwell said. 11 people on a ridge who are still waiting for a convoy that's never coming. They haven't moved, Miller confirmed. Still in position. Ground interdiction team, Caldwell said. Approach from the south, below their coverage arc. Same approach angle as the extraction route, Claire said. The terrain masking will work at that distance. You heard her, Caldwell said to Torres. Torres was already moving. 607, the operation that had been built to destroy Iron Horizon was being dismantled layer by layer. The ridge, the platform, the withdrawal corridor. And inside the staging area in a specific sector that now had security personnel positioned at every exit, a communications unit whose members didn't know yet that their coordination signal had been traced and triangulated, and that the 3 minutes they had spent transmitting tonight had given the room everything it needed. Claire looked at her map, page 7, week 10 of her surveillance log. There was a notation she hadn't mentioned yet. She hadn't mentioned it because it was the one piece of information she wasn't certain about, the one element that didn't fit cleanly into the pattern, the one data point that had kept her awake for the last 3 nights, not because of what it confirmed, but because of what it suggested. "Sir," she said. Caldwell turned from the planning station. "There's one more thing," Claire said. The room slowed. Something in her voice. Not panic, not urgency, the specific quality of a person who has been waiting to say something and has decided that the right moment is now. "The mobile reconnaissance circuit I identified in week 3, she said. "The one that mapped our surveillance blind spots." "Yes," Caldwell said. "I identified 4 runs of that circuit," Claire said. "The first 3 were consistent with what I described earlier. Reconnaissance signal testing blind spot confirmation. And the 4th," Claire turned page 7 of her map toward Caldwell. "The 4th run carried a different signal," she said. "Not a test transmission, a data transmission, a structured data burst, 17 seconds long, transmitted from inside the operational corridor to an external receiver." Caldwell stepped closer. He looked at the notation. "What kind of data?" he asked. "I couldn't decode the content," Claire said. "The encryption was beyond my resources, but I could identify the data volume and the transmission architecture." And Claire looked up at him. "It was a personnel roster," she said, "and based on the file size and the structural format of the transmission, it was a document consistent with a complete Iron Horizon personnel roster." The room absorbed this, a complete personnel roster. Every name, every rank, every assignment. Every person in the 8,000 personnel operation transmitted from inside the corridor to an external receiver 6 weeks ago. "Which means," Hayes said quietly, "whoever is behind this doesn't just know the operation plan. They know every person in it," Claire said, "by name, by position, by assignment." General Torres turned from the planning station. His face had gone very controlled. "That's not intelligence collection for a one-night ambush." "No, sir," Claire said. "That's a long-term target list," Torres said. "That's what I believe," Claire said. "Whatever happened tonight, the ridge, the platform, the coordination element tonight was one operation. The first one, the personnel roster, suggests there's a longer program. The silence that followed lasted longer than any of the silences before it." Caldwell looked at the map. At page 7, at the notation Claire had made 6 weeks ago about a 17-second data burst that she had flagged in a report that had been recategorized as low priority and quietly buried. "You filed this," he said. "Week 10 report," Claire said. "I flagged the data transmission as a critical priority item, and it was recategorized. Same as the others." Caldwell put both hands on the table and leaned forward. He looked at Claire with an expression that had shed every remaining layer of the commander's professional composure. What was underneath wasn't anger, it wasn't frustration, it was something much starker. "How many people," he said very slowly, "are at risk because those reports were buried?" Claire held his gaze. 8,000 tonight," she said. "Potentially everyone on that roster going forward." The number moved through the room. 8,000. Then Hayes said, "And nobody knows about the roster transmission except you." "Nobody who took action on it," Claire said. Caldwell straightened. He turned to face the room. All of it. The screens, the stations, the people. He was doing the full accounting now. Not just of tonight, of everything. "I want every report filed by Major Whitmore in the last 14 weeks pulled from the triage system," he said. "Every single one, regardless of its current categorization. I want them on my desk within the hour." "Sir," a voice confirmed, "I want the personnel roster transmission flagged as a critical intelligence item and routed immediately to the counterintelligence division." "Sir, and I want to know the name of every person who made a recategorization decision on a Whitmore report in the last 14 weeks." The room moved. 6:32. Captain Miller looked up from his console. He had been quiet for several minutes, managing the aerial interdiction coordination and the Ridge approach team and the staging area lockdown simultaneously. But now he looked up, and there was something in his expression that the last 3 hours had built toward without Miller himself quite knowing it. He looked at Claire. She was at the map again, working, still adding notations, still tracking. Even now, with the operation fragmenting around her and the interdiction teams in the field and the counterintelligence referral on its way, she was still watching. Major Whitmore, Miller said. She looked over. The aerial team has confirmed interdiction on the platform, he said. Both vehicle signatures neutralized. No casualties on our side. Claire nodded. And the Ridge approach team is in position, Miller said, awaiting authorization to move. Caldwell looked at Claire. Your approach angle. You're certain of the coverage arc limitation. Yes, sir, Claire said. At that angle, the approach team is below the ridge line of sight for the entire final 600 meters. Authorize the approach, Caldwell said to Torres. Torres gave the order. 6:14. The Falcon Ridge interdiction team moved into position. 11 people on a ridge who had been waiting for a convoy for 74 minutes. Waiting with the discipline of people who had been told to hold until the signal. Waiting for a convoy that had been held by a woman they didn't know whose report had been buried by a system designed to bury it, who had walked into a room full of generals at 2 a.m. with a handwritten map and said stop. The approach team reached the base of the ridge. Miller was tracking the thermal signatures on the main screen. The approach team leader's voice came through, in position, ready on your mark. Caldwell looked at the room, at the clock, at the map, at Claire. Authorized, he said. The thermal signatures on the screen began to move. Not the approach team, the ridge. They've spotted the approach, Miller said. Signatures are breaking position. Multiple units moving, or someone said, dispersing north and south along the ridge. Aerial support on the ridge position, Caldwell said. Overhead in 90 seconds, Torres said. 90 seconds. The approach team leader's voice came through. Contact. Multiple personnel. Engaging. The room was completely focused on the screen. The thermal display. 11 signatures and an approach team converging on the ridge. Movement, counter-movement. The specific chaos that happens when a carefully planned operation meets a response it didn't prepare for. 60 seconds. 45. 30. The aerial support reached the ridge position, and then one by one the movement on the screen began to stop. Not all at once, one at a time. Signatures going stationary. Caldwell was counting them. Claire could see his lips moving slightly. 7 stationary, 8, 9. Approach team leader, Miller said. Status report. A pause on the channel. 12 seconds. Then ridge secured, 9 personnel in custody, 2 runners northwest, aerial support pursuing. The room exhaled. Torres was already coordinating the pursuit. The aerial team had visual on the 2 runners. The northwest approach led back into terrain that the approach team could cover. It took 4 minutes. 4 minutes and both runners were contained. 6:19. Ridge position secured, Miller announced. All 11 personnel accounted for. 9 in custody at position 2 apprehended in pursuit. No casualties on the approach team. Caldwell put his hand on the back of a chair. He stood there for a moment. Then he turned to Claire, and the expression on his face was one that would stay with everyone in that room for the rest of their lives. Not the dismissive confidence of the man who had laughed at her 3 hours ago. Not the recalculating uncertainty of the man who had watched the thermal signatures appear on the ridge. Something else entirely. The expression of a man who understood completely and without any remaining qualification what the last 3 hours had actually been. Not a successful operation. A near catastrophe that had been prevented by one person who had refused to stop working when the system stopped listening. Major Whitmore, he said. Sir, she said. He walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of her, not across the table, not across the room, in front of her. On behalf of this command, he said, I owe you more than an apology. Sir. Don't, he said, not unkindly, firmly. Let me finish. She waited. You came into this room tonight with information that should have reached us 6 weeks ago. It didn't reach us because my system failed. People under my command made decisions that buried critical intelligence during an active threat window. He paused. And when the system failed, you didn't wait for it to fix itself. You came through the door anyway. Claire looked at him. I came through the door because there were people in harm's way, sir, that's all. That's everything, Hayes said from across the room. Caldwell looked at her for another moment. Then he said, I'm going to need your full analysis. Everything. The complete 14 weeks, the personnel roster transmission, the triage suppression documentation, the second position data, all of it. I have it, Claire said. She put her hand on the field map. All of it is here. I know, he said. I want it in a formal report on the record with your name on it. A pause. Your real name, not a sealed file classification, your name. Claire looked at the map. Her name. On the record. For the last 4 years, her name had existed in a sealed file that most people couldn't access. Her work had passed through a triage system that automatically discounted it. Her judgments had been overridden, her reports buried her credibility categorized as insufficient. And now the commanding officer of Operation Iron Horizon was telling her to put her name on the record. Yes, sir, she said. 623. Miller's console activated. He put his headset on. Listen for a moment. Sir, he said, the security team at the communications unit position in staging. A pause. They've made contact with the unit. Status, Caldwell said. 2 personnel are attempting to claim equipment malfunction as the source of the transmission we traced, Miller said. A 3rd has requested to speak with legal counsel. Requesting legal counsel, Torres said from across the room, and his voice carried the specific dry quality of a man who has just heard a very loud confirmation. Keep all 3 in custody, Caldwell said. Full isolation, no external communications. Yes, sir. 6:25, the clock moved. The operation that was supposed to destroy Iron Horizon had been broken down piece by piece. The ridge, the platform, the withdrawal corridor, the coordination element inside the staging area. And somewhere above them, in an office that hadn't been opened yet, a sealed personnel file was about to become very unsealable. But that was tomorrow's work. Right now, Claire Whitmore sat at the table in an underground command room with her field map open in front of her, and she began writing the formal report that General Caldwell had asked for. Page 1. Her name at the top, clear, legible, on the record. And as she wrote, Captain Evan Miller, who had been watching her since the moment she walked through the door, who had been the first person in the room to listen, who had found the signal she told him to look for, picked up his own notebook and started writing too. Not a formal report, something else, a private record of what he had witnessed. He would keep it for years. The beginning of it read, She didn't come into that room to be believed. She came in because the truth needed to be somewhere other than a sealed file and a handwritten map. And she was the only person willing to carry it. The truth about what it costs to be right when the system is built to ignore you. The truth about what it takes to walk through a door that wasn't open for you. The truth about Sergeant Daniel Brooks and Corporal Matthew Collins, whose names were in the margin of her map because she had refused to let them be numbers. Those names stayed with Caldwell too. He would carry them differently after tonight. He would carry a lot of things differently. But that reckoning the full weight of what this night had revealed about the system, about the people inside it, about the space between rank and judgment, that reckoning was just beginning. And Claire Whitmore was not finished yet. Claire wrote every word of it herself. Nobody dictated. Nobody suggested phrasing. Nobody stood over her shoulder and guided her hand. Caldwell had given her the space, and she had used every inch of it, moving through the 14 weeks with the same methodical precision she had used to build the analysis in the first place. Beginning at the beginning, ending at the end, leaving nothing out. 0847, when she signed her name at the bottom of the last page. Major Claire Whitmore, not a sealed file number, not an analyst designation. Her name. She set the pen down. General Caldwell picked up the report. He didn't read it immediately. He held it in both hands for a moment, feeling the weight of it, 63 pages of handwritten and typed documentation, formal exhibits, signal data, terrain analysis, and the 14-week surveillance log that had been sitting in a triage queue marked low priority while the operation it described was actively unfolding around 8,000 people who had no idea. He looked at her. This goes directly to the Inspector General, today. Not through the standard routing, hand-delivered. Yes, sir, Claire said. And a copy to the Counterintelligence Division, he said, specifically regarding the personnel roster transmission. Already noted in the exhibit index, Claire said. He almost smiled, almost. Of course it is. Hayes came into the room from the corridor. He had been outside for the last 20 minutes on a call Claire hadn't been told about. His face when he came back in was controlled, but carrying something. Stahl has been informed he's under investigation, Hayes said. He said it to Caldwell, but he looked at Claire. Caldwell nodded once. His access has been suspended. Effective an hour ago, Hayes said. He's been asked to remain available for questioning. And the deputy director position, interim appointment pending formal review, Hayes said. He paused. It's going to be a complicated process. He has people in that division who have worked under him for years. People who may or may not have participated in the recategorization decisions, Torres said from across the room. That, Hayes said carefully, is exactly what the investigation will need to determine. Claire looked at her hands. She had known for months that the person suppressing her reports was not acting alone. Systems don't automatically route information into low-priority queues without people to maintain those queues. Triage protocols don't survive long enough to become effective without people who benefit from their existence. She had known. But knowing and naming were different things. The two personnel from the communications unit who tried to claim equipment malfunction, Caldwell said. Status still in isolation, Torres said. The third one who requested counsel has given a preliminary statement. The room waited. He says he was told the rerouting of the coordination signal was a technical exercise, Torres said. A routine test of the staging area communication architecture. He believed that, Hayes said. He says he believed it, Torres said. Whether that holds under formal questioning is a different matter. Caldwell looked at Claire. Do you believe it? Claire considered the question. Not quickly. She gave it the same careful attention she gave everything. The signal routing was technically sophisticated, she said. It would have required someone with significant communications expertise to set it up in a way that looked routine. The personnel in that unit may genuinely not have understood what they were facilitating. Or they may have understood exactly what they were doing, Hayes said. That's what the investigation will determine, Claire said. 8:41. The clock on the wall had moved through an entire night and into a morning that was beginning to make itself known through means Claire couldn't see, but could feel the quality of the air in the room changing slightly, the rhythm of the people around her shifting from crisis pace to something that was still urgent but differently so. The specific energy of an operation that has passed its crisis point and entered its accountability phase. Miller appeared at her left. He had been at his console for the last hour, maintaining the communication channels for the various teams in the field. But now his shift was being handed off, and he was standing beside her with the expression of someone who has decided to say something and is working up to saying it. Captain, Claire said. Major, he said, and then after a pause, I found the signal. She looked at him. You told me where to look, he said. I want to be accurate about that, but I found it. You did, she said. I've been doing this for 7 years, he said. I've never found something that was supposed to be nothing. A pause. You knew it was there. I knew the frequency range, Claire said. You knew how to look. Miller shook his head slightly. That's generous. It's accurate, Claire said. There's a difference between identifying a pattern and knowing how to work a console at 2 in the morning when 12 generals are waiting on your result. What you did tonight took something I can't teach anyone. Miller was quiet for a moment. I'm going to put in a request, he said, for a review of the surveillance tasking protocol, specifically the filtered data handling process. What you found in the filtered archive, it needs a formal review, Claire said. Time? Yes. I'd like to cite your methodology in the request, he said. Claire looked at him. You don't need my permission for that. No, he said, but I wanted you to know. She nodded. It was a small thing, a procedural thing, a request for a process review in a military organization that would move through its own channels at its own speed. But it was also the specific kind of small thing that changes how systems work over years. And Claire understood the difference between the gestures that feel important and the actions that actually are. Include the filtered data analysis from weeks 3 through 8, she said. That's the strongest case study for why the protocol needs to change. Yes, ma'am, Miller said. He went back to his console. Torres appeared. Claire. He used her name without rank, which from Torres was notable. He was a man for whom protocol was a form of respect, and dropping it was deliberate. The 2 runners from the ridge, the ones the aerial team apprehended. Yes, she said. One of them has been identified, Torres said. He's on the personnel roster you flagged in the Week 10 report. The transmission. He's on the list. Claire was very still for a moment. Which means he knew his name was on it. Which means he knew the roster had been transmitted, Torres said. Which means the coordination runs deeper than the staging area communications unit. Claire looked at the map, at the notation from week 10, the 17-second data burst, the personnel roster. Someone gave him access to the confirmation of that transmission, she said. Someone inside the intelligence pipeline, Torres said. Which means the investigation doesn't end with Stahl, Claire said. No, Torres said. It doesn't. He held her gaze for a moment. You understand what you have opened, base. I understand, she said. It's going to get complicated, he said. Formal proceedings, testimony, your sealed file will become part of the investigation record. I know, Claire said. There will be people, Torres said carefully, who have reasons to challenge your credibility. The same reasons they've been using for 4 years. I know that too, Claire said. Torres looked at her for a long moment. The specific look of a man who has spent 26 years in intelligence, watching people navigate systems that were not designed for them. You came in here anyway, he said. The convoy needed to stop, Claire said. That was the job. Torres nodded, once, firmly. The way a person nods when someone has said something that doesn't require additional comment because it is already complete. He went back to his station. Line 03. Caldwell came to stand beside Claire for the last time that morning. The room had thinned slightly, some personnel rotating out, the immediate crisis teams standing down, the longer-term response elements taking their positions. The energy was different, still serious, but the specific pitch of crisis had resolved into something lower and steadier. The official operation report, Caldwell said, will reflect the intelligence analysis that redirected the convoy and secured the corridor. He paused. It will reflect the source of that analysis accurately. Claire looked at him. Sir, the report will also need to reflect the 2 soldiers we lost. Yes, he said, it will. Sergeant Daniel Brooks, she said. Corporal Matthew Collins. Caldwell looked at her. Something moved across his face. You've known their names. Since the beginning of the watch, she said. I knew who was assigned to Eagle's position. I wrote their names in the margin of my map in week 12 when I identified the Falcon Ridge preparation signatures, because I needed to remember what the stakes were. Caldwell was quiet for a long moment. And you carried that? Yes, sir. For 2 weeks? Yes, sir. He looked at her. And then he said something that wasn't in any briefing protocol or command procedure. Something that came from a different place entirely. I'm sorry, he said, for those 2 weeks, for the 6 weeks before that when the reports were buried, for the 4 years before that when your file was sealed, because you were right about something that made the wrong people uncomfortable. He paused. The system failed you long before tonight, and the cost of that failure has a name. 2 names. Claire held his gaze. She didn't deflect. She didn't minimize. She received what he was saying with the same steadiness she had maintained for the entire night. Not because she was unaffected, because she understood that some truths require a witness, and right now, she was his. Those names matter, she said. Make sure they are in the report. They will be, Caldwell said. I'll write that section myself. 911. Claire picked up her field map from the table. 63 pages of formal report already in Caldwell's hands for routing to the Inspector General. The satellite archive exhibits logged and numbered. The signal data formatted and attached. And the map, the original map, the one she had been carrying for 14 weeks. She folded it carefully. The way you fold something that has been through a great deal and deserves to arrive at its next location intact. Hayes appeared in the doorway. Transport is ready to take you to the debrief facility. Sir, she said. She moved toward the door. Major Whitmore. She stopped. Turned. General Caldwell was standing at the center of the room. The same position he had been standing when she walked in. The same table. The same operational map on the screens. The same underground room where 12 generals had laughed at her 7 hours ago. He was not laughing now. He looked at her across the room with the full weight of everything that had happened between that moment and this one. The person who sent you here, he said. The deputy commander. 4 years ago. Claire waited. He knew, Caldwell said. He knew the system would bury your reports. He knew you'd have to come through the door the hard way. A pause. He sent you anyway, because he knew that's how it had to be done. Claire looked at him. Yes, sir. He trusted you to be right, Caldwell said, and to keep being right even when nobody believed you. He trusted me to do the job, Claire said. The rest of it wasn't his to carry. Caldwell nodded, slowly. The rest of it was yours. Yours. Yes, sir, Claire said. It was. She walked through the door. The debriefing took 11 hours. The investigation that followed took 8 months. At the end of it, Brigadier General Warren Stahl was removed from his position and referred to military prosecutors. 2 members of his staff were formally disciplined. The intelligence triage protocol that had buried Claire's reports was suspended, reviewed, and rebuilt from the foundation up. The sealed file on Major Claire Whitmore was opened, reviewed, and closed again, not because the review found problems, but because the review found the opposite. The conduct complaints filed 4 years ago were dismissed. The methodology she had used to identify the wrong target was formally recognized as correct. The 43 people who had not been in that building when the strike didn't happen were not named in the report. But everyone who read it understood they were there. Corporal Jason Reed recovered fully. I was back in the field within 5 months. He wrote Claire a letter, 1 page. He thanked her for the 4 words transmitted to the wash at 0500. We see you, we are coming. He said he had been in that depression for 41 minutes before that signal arrived. He said there were moments in those 41 minutes when he wasn't sure anyone knew where he was. The signal changed that. Claire kept the letter in the same folder as her field map. Captain Evan Miller's request for a protocol review was approved. The filtered data handling process was revised to flag recurring signal anomalies for secondary human review rather than automatic suppression. The revision was implemented across 12 operational commands. He cited Claire's methodology in the formal proposal. With her permission this time, she gave it without hesitation. 6 months after Operation Iron Horizon, Claire walked into another briefing room. Different building, different state, different operation, different table. She carried the same kind of folder, the same type of field map, the same expression, not quiet, not aggressive, but present. Completely fully present in the way that people are present when they understand that the work in front of them is real, and the stakes are real, and the time for anything other than focus has not arrived and may not arrive. The room had 12 people in it. Generals, colonels, senior intelligence officers, people with rank and experience, and long records of decisions that had shaped operations and careers and lives. And when Claire walked in, before she reached her chair, before she opened her folder, before she said a single word, every person in that room stood up. Not because it was protocol, not because they were required to, because word travels in military organizations. The way truth travels everywhere, slowly at first, through resistance and skepticism and the weight of established hierarchy, and then all at once arriving in rooms before the person it describes has even entered. They had heard about the convoy that stopped. They had heard about the ridge. They had heard about the map. They had heard about 18 minutes. And every person in that room understood something that no rank structure can teach, and no training manual can fully capture. That experience does not always come dressed in its own decorations. That judgment does not always carry its own introduction, and that the most important voice in any room is not always the loudest one. Sometimes it belongs to the person who was already right before anyone was ready to listen. Claire looked at the people standing around the table. She set her folder down. She sat, and she opened the map. The work was not finished. It never was. That was the thing about truth. It didn't arrive once and stay. It had to be carried every day by people willing to carry it into rooms that weren't ready for it. People who understood that the job wasn't to be believed on the first attempt. The job was to keep working until the moment arrived when belief became the only rational response to the evidence in front of them. Claire Whitmore had always understood that. She had understood it for 14 weeks in a quiet room with a satellite archive and a handwritten map. She had understood it at 2 a.m. in front of 12 generals who laughed. She understood it now in a new room with new stakes, carrying the same weight she had always carried, the weight of knowing something true and refusing to put it down until someone listened. She opened her mouth.